Dara, firstly, how restricted is speech in Australia at the moment, and how much more danger is it in?
It is extremely restricted, and it's restricted on multiple fronts. It's restricted, of course, through the legislation that we have. We have multiple pieces of legislation, both state and federal, that impinge on our right to freedom of speech. But this is not all, and this is where the Free Speech Union really comes into its own, not just to fight the battles, the political battles, and wind back some of these impingements on free speech in the legislative realm, but also in the cultural realm. We see so many people that are subjected to cancel culture. There is a popular belief amongst people that are skeptics of this phenomenon we call cancel culture, that it's only really the big wigs, you know, the J.K. Rowlings and so on, that are getting cancelled, and they have deep pockets, so what's the problem? They have the ability to fight when a mob comes for them. But for the ordinary people, in ordinary situations in Australian society, they are subjected to the same things. There are so many cases of people that have disciplinary hearings at work based on things they've said outside of work that have no bearing on their ability to practice their jobs, which is one of the main functions of the Free Speech Union.
Let's get to those cases in a minute, but I just want to dwell for a second on those two aspects that you referred to and that I talked about in my introduction. Let's talk about the legislation. Which legislation troubles you the most?
Unfortunately, it is quite innumerable in the sense that there are many different pieces of legislation that impinge on freedom of speech. One of the main types of legislation that we see are definitely the Anti-Discrimination Acts, be it the Racial Discrimination Act with its infamous Section 18C, which has caused many issues in Australia. But there's also state laws that are equivalent that have also been used to infringe the free speech rights of Australian citizens.
When Section 18C was introduced in the mid-90s, it was introduced by a Labor Attorney General called Michael Lavarch. I remember looking into it some years ago and was alarmed when I saw him refer to the section or justify that section by saying he thought that that bit of legislation was, this is the word he used, educative. Now, this was, I mean, there are educative aspects to law, I know that, but this section was introduced, in my opinion, by authoritarian politicians who wanted to teach plebs like you and I that what the confines of their speech was, and it was dictated by them. And it was, of course, contrary to our freedom of speech and therefore freedom of thought. But I mean, is that the intention of this kind of legislation, to teach ordinary people how to behave?
I think there are multiple different intentions at play. The one that you're referring to is definitely a case of them trying to nudge us into a particular direction and have with particular ideas of what is considered civil. For the most part, I think these pieces of legislation are well intended. The problem is that they're counterproductive to the extent that hate speech laws, which is essentially what the Section 18C of the Racial Discrimination Act is effective. It actually has been shown by many academics to be completely ineffective at driving change. What happens is that people just have those conversations around the dinner table and in private rather than in public. So it actually doesn't create the effect that these politicians that put forward this legislation actually intends, in the sense that it doesn't change how we speak. It does change how we speak in public, but it doesn't change how we speak in private, and it doesn't stop us thinking these things.
Exactly. And that's a very good point. I'd argue, in fact, that Australia is probably a more racist place now since 18C, because I mean, we saw it on the steps of the Sydney Opera House just last week. People chanting "Death to Jews." I mean, you wouldn't have seen that in the mid-90s. Australia was a friendlier place back then. So perhaps this legislation does have a sort of ulterior effect.